I'm so much looking forward to speak with a professional in psychology and self-leadership. And I would like first to present you what I liked about your profile. You are a psychologist and you have built your expertise in self-leadership. You are keen to develop the agency of people in their lives, at work. It's always about bringing out the potential out of people. I was so keen to talk to you about a topic which is around career progression. Is it a threat or is it a challenge? And because we women, despite how accomplished we are, our side of questioning ourselves, our imposter syndrome can sometimes show up in a very surprising and unintended way. And I recall, Maike, when we spoke, I had to convince you twice before you agreed upon to join my recording. You were saying, okay, you are specialized, Catherine, in organizational leadership with your experience and self-leadership. Is it really at the right place? So here's my introduction, and I'm so glad that you're here today with us.
Oh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Yes, I think that was really quite funny, wasn't it? I think we both had to laugh about that afterwards because it was just so fitting that for some reason I saw this conversation, this potential conversation sometime in the future as a threat rather than a challenge or something to look forward to. And that's the exact topic that obviously you wanted to talk about and what that does with us cognitively, or what that means for us in terms of goal accomplishment. Yeah, so I thought it's quite interesting. We just come from very different backgrounds, obviously, and straight away I just questioned, do I have enough to give?
That is also the power of collegiality, is to be there for the other one and just to tell them, okay, no worries, we can make it together. And that is also the power of diversity. And which let's meet to our topic. On one side, we have never seen so many female CEOs in a Fortune 500 companies, and I think it's still not enough. And on the other side, we see figures, which I also posted on my introduction, the imposter syndrome, and which seems to grow, where women tend to question themselves. So I would like to go through that topic and see, especially from a cognitive perspective, do you see that there is a gender difference?
Yeah, so I can't really say that it's something I've noticed, but I've spent probably the majority of my career in academia, various roles in academia. So as a researcher, as a lecturer, as a consultant to industry. And government, and I can't really say that this is something I observed. I'm a little bit familiar with the imposter syndrome literature, but what I have come across is that there are not really any gender differences with regard to perceived imposter syndrome. So there are a few sort of differences, for example, with regard to educational attainment. So it's usually high achievers who question themselves a lot. And I think this has to do with the fact that the more we know what we don't know. So this is also something that's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, that we have also seen a lot throughout the pandemic, that it often seems like those who have the least amount of education on a particular topic have very strong opinions and voices. But I have come across the phenomenon that apparently, and I don't know whether this is the latest research on it, that women express it more openly to have this imposter syndrome. But I'm not sure. But obviously, in terms of industry workplaces, this would be something that probably you are a lot more experienced in than I am. I do believe that because of the inequalities in workplaces, sort of, and historically, surely this does something with women's confidence, probably on a collective. And I think there are certain challenges for sure that women face in terms of the the stigma we have, for example, you know, if we are firm in the workplace with the way that we communicate, it's often seen as maybe ignorant or harsh, versus if a male shows the same type of communication, then he's just, you know, firm and he's a good leader. So of course I would assume that those differences impact women to their detriment.
You know, one thing I always say, and I don't know if it's really baked by research, I've never found it. When we look at competence and confidence, it seems that we women, we prefer to stay in our competence zone when men feel confident, even if they maybe aren't really competent for something. Do you see something, a relationship or distinction between confidence and competence, difference between men and women?
Again, I'm not super familiar with the gender differences. What I can speak to is what it does with someone if they're not comfortable to come out of their comfort zone, for example. Or let me put it this way. If you say, for example, there is a difference between men and women in the way they perceive the whole topic and the whole idea of career progression. If you say that men generally approach this topic as a challenge, yeah, and women approach it, to women it more so poses a threat, for example, then I can tell you, then clearly we have a difference here in the way that even, let's say, cognitively, those two different groups would function in that way. So, for example, we know that perceiving something as a challenge versus a threat is like a key marker of a difference between eustress and distress. So the positive type of stress or the negative type of stress, it's also a key factor between having a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And it activates completely different areas in our brain, which kind of compete with one another. And which means that one group will be, in this case, the males will be more in a situation where they can think rationally and logically, they will have more cognitive resources available to them, and so forth, versus women who will be more stressed, more anxious, will probably have a narrower focus. So sort of the different brain regions, you know, where you could say one is a little bit more the fight or flight response, you know, the emotional brain, the limbic system, and the other one, you know, perceiving something as a challenge where you go towards it and it sort of becomes like a playful something, and, you know, it's a positive thing. We're driven towards that, and that does something very different with our brain, and it allows us to really tap into all those cognitive resources that we always think is what makes us human anyway, that whole good decision making, rational thinking, reasoning, you know, so where we are, yeah, just a lot more resourceful. And then it's also no surprise that that group of people would be maybe more successful by tackling certain challenges as well.
Right. Oh,
Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. And it confirms, talking with my New York colleagues who were in charge of the annual Mercer study, When Women Thrive, what they found out, if you had a job description with 10 requirements, women were showing up, if they were showing up, with 12 or 13 skills, and men maybe with 3 or 4, and saying, well, I'm going to learn on the fly. What you just explained with the different brain zones and the different types of stress, it makes very much sense. So you just mentioned the playfulness. And if we're talking about playfulness, it is, you know, there is a saying in French that male usually use. It's, I'm going to say it now in French, la course au sapin. I mean, who can climb the quickest to the top? And it is about something which is, you know, it's a playground for them often, which takes away some of the stress and brings more the discovery, the exploration, the adventurous side up front as something positive. What I found is that whenever there are some political games going on within, especially corporations or larger companies, and when I talk with my clients, female clients, about political savviness, to control the playground or the playfield and to know how to play with your male counterparts or peers in such a way that you are also upbringing your voice and explaining what is important to you. They are pushing break and saying, Catherine, I don't really feel comfortable with that political play, or I don't want to be politically savvy. And I have the impression that they feel kind of dirty. In your research, did you see something where we could say that women, this feeling dirty, where they can see that a career progression would entail that they maybe need to be or to develop a behavior which is not congruent with their own values? Did you notice that with your clients?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that I can speak directly to that. What I was thinking straight away as you were sort of describing the difference, again, men approaching it almost like as a game and playfulness and political play and the whole, relationships and having to manage those social interactions and relationships and, almost like in a very creative way out of your comfort zone. What I had to think of was that, again, if we're talking about two completely different approaches to this same situation, one is working from a place of positivity and the other one is working from a place of threat, where under threat, this is a threatening situation and it's like a dangerous situation. What this does is, so we know that positive emotions and positivity is absolutely key for not only allowing us to tap into those, let's say, the prefrontal cortex and our clear thinking and and we also know that positive emotions are important because they maximize our performance at work, our productivity, but we also know that they improve our innovative thinking, our ability to be innovative, to be creative. And we know that positive emotions actually allow us to build stronger social connections as well, to go deeper into a relationship and to manage our interactions with other people in a much more sort of adaptive way. So straight away, again, you can see how this different approach gives one group the resources to tackle this play field in a much more creative and equipped and resourceful way, not only in their own thinking, but also in their ability to relate to other people and harness other relationships. And if you're talking about political games and all those sort of intricate personal interrelationships in the workplace, this will be a key resource to tap into. That would definitely be of an advantage to that group. Does that make sense?
It does, although the relationship that men have with power, personally, they can achieve it, but maybe that within the company, for the good of the company, for the sake of all the employees, they won't achieve the goals which are good for the companies. And where I would like to bring in also the strengths of women is about their emotions, the feeling of empathy, their strengths in bringing, assembling everyone behind them, and also them more working on a peer-to-peer network and almost like they're more enablers in general, rather than men who bring these skills on the table. But when you are leading a company or a business, it is absolutely crucial that you can ensure that you have all your Now, this is a very male type of vocabulary, but that you have all your soldiers behind you, and that we are working as a force, and that we are moving forward and achieving things together. So the question would be for me, how can we give women who have maybe the imposter syndrome or are questioning themselves in a moment of doubts, which happens to every one of us, once in a while, what could they do to activate this part of the innovative, creative side of their brain, and to consider Playfield as something joyful, and where they can basically build something also on their own, or contribute in a new way?
That's a really nice question. And actually, before I answer that, when you said before that women have different qualities to some extent, where it just reminded me of a report I've recently read. It's a recent report by, I think, McKinsey, where they basically they found a similar sort of outcome, that women seem to focus a lot more on doing the right thing by the company in terms of morals and ethics, whereas men, I think, sometimes might focus a little bit more on their own career progression, whereas women, so it seems like they found that women put a lot more energy into diversity, making sure that their staff, when they have concerns about their workloads, they kind of, put some energy towards that. That they understand diversity issues, inclusive workplaces, those sorts of things. So it seems like they sacrifice a lot of their own career potential in order to do the right thing by the people in their team and by the company, maybe with a much longer term focus,
Oh, yeah.
So I just thought that was very interesting. In terms of your question, how people can be helped to experience imposter syndrome or self-doubt, or perceive their career progression or the workplace as a battlefield rather than a playfield or a challenge, it's a very good question. So often it's almost simply, but that doesn't mean it's easy, but simply a matter of making the decision. So it's the same for a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So the first thing, it always starts with awareness, with self-awareness. And it's the same for self-leadership. Everything starts with self-awareness and self-knowledge. So you have to be able to pinpoint when those moments occur and when those thoughts occur. Now, with imposter syndrome in particular, it can be a very tricky one for people, but when you logically play through your reasoning of why someone could possibly find out that really you know nothing, or you're completely underqualified or incapable, it never makes sense. Logically, it doesn't really make sense. But what we do when we feel as if we are an imposter is we compensate for that. So we do that by either procrastinating. So leading up to a deadline, we might completely procrastinate it because we develop so much fear around sort of being found out that we leave things to the last minute. Or it could be that we completely overcompensate by putting way more resources, time and effort and energy into a particular task. So what then happens is, when we accomplish the task, which most imposters or people with imposter syndrome do, because they are the high achievers usually, they then go, okay, they justify having accomplished the task by going either I was lucky, so external attribution, right? Or saying, especially because I left everything to the last minute. Or they say, of course, I had to put so much extra energy and effort into this that for them, it confirms their own belief. It becomes a cognitive bias. It is a cognitive bias they have, right? So it just confirms to them that if they were just, as qualified and capable as everybody else, they wouldn't have to put all the extra resources into it and the extra time and effort. So unfortunately, they find themselves in this negative thought cycle.
Yes.
right? Because it just goes on and on and on. So the only way to break through that is to observe when it happens, see that it doesn't make any sense, and break through it. And literally, you can only do that by establishing personal boundaries and just putting sort of like the right amount of effort or time or energy into something, and then kind of trust that that is enough. You can always do more. You can always learn more. There's always more you can know, and there are always more skills you can have. There is no end ever. And sort of just to trust that. And once you start breaking through that, and you can see that you have the same kind of achievements, you can sort of then slowly also get that reality check, and sort of have that sort of confirmed to yourself that, you know, clearly you are not an imposter. So that is one thing. And in terms of perceiving something as a challenge versus you know, play or an opportunity, similar to, you know, a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And honestly, again, it starts with a mindful approach. So being aware when you have certain attitude, or when you do perceive something as a threat, you know, like just like after our chat, when, you know, I messaged you afterwards, I was like, this is ridiculous. I questioned myself about this, you know, but it's funny. And we do those things because we do them all the time, and they go unnoticed sometimes. So we kind of have to really practice mindfulness so that we can pick ourselves up on that. And then it's literally a matter of making a choice to not buy into that. And I know this sounds a bit funny, but when you think about it logically, and with everything we know about neuroscience and brain plasticity, you know, that we know we can always learn more, you know, that sort of stuff. And that success doesn't necessarily come down to being hyper intelligent or being lucky or anything like that. But most of it comes down to effort. And, you know, putting the effort into it and learning more and those sorts of things, then it just makes sense. And then you can accept that reality, and then you go, okay, what can I do in order to maybe support myself to approach the situation a bit better or more constructively next time? So what a lot of this comes down to is self-awareness, but also self-regulation. So being able to switch this around cognitively, but also emotionally. So what I spoke about earlier, that positivity and positive emotions, we know now they play a key part in to success. And we always thought that first you were successful and then you were happy, but now we know it's the other way around. This research is summarized under the broaden and build theory. So it really comes down to being able to regulate your own emotions. And I know sometimes it's easier said than done. When you're feeling stressed, it comes down to stress management techniques. And I know different people have their own maybe favorites. I think these days most people are familiar with some of them. Going for a walk is an amazing tool to calm yourself down, to get rid of your anxiety. You know, putting your head under your desk for 10 minutes and, you know, doing progressive muscle relaxation, or having a nap. Looking at you, Catherine. Having a nap, you know, or just doing a short mindfulness practice, whatever it might be, that works for you. That's what it comes down to regulate your emotions and switch from autopilot and stressed and anxious sort of brain functions to back into the driver's seat, you know, so that you can make those better decisions and tap into your innovation and creativity.
Thank you. I think breathing exercises are excellent. What the Dalai Lama also teaches is just to go out and just to put a foot before the other one, and to focus solely on that for several minutes, because it's going to clear your mind and your fears are going to disappear. And brings me to one thing: perfectionism. We women, we love perfectionism. I mean, I'm now more focusing obviously on women. So please, dear men, don't feel upset with that. It is, for me, we started around women and gender difference. I think that because of our social upbringing and education upbringing, to be the nice girl, to be well dressed, to behave well, the blah, blah, blah. How can we step away from that and accept that it is not about being perfect? It's about being who we are with our imperfections, because I think that it is tied to something more important. It does not allow us to fail and to pivot. And I think that nowadays in companies, it is immensely important, and this is valid for men and women, by the way, is to be able to say, okay, I accept it. That is not the right direction. Let's change. Let's disrupt ourselves. Let's do whatever is needed to be done to reconnect with success or recreate the success. How can we get away from that fear of failure?
That's a good question. And as you were sort of phrasing that question, straight away I was thinking, I feel really uncomfortable with what I said before, because it was only half of the picture. So you have to see, I come from a self-leadership perspective. My focus is what can people do for themselves, whether men or women, doesn't really matter. How can I increase my own agency? Where can I control the things around me? But of course, we all live in systems, in very complex systems, and we're not isolated from those systems we live in. And of course, in organizations. So for example, when you asked before, well, what can we do to help those people who may be experiencing imposter syndrome? And I only speak from what can individuals do for themselves from that perspective. But of course, it takes two to tango. It also means if I say, for example, we need to establish personal boundaries, those boundaries need to be respected. And maybe some boundaries need to be put in place by organizations. I know a lot of organizations do this. For example, in some organizations, you, for example, can't send any emails in after hours or right. Those sorts of things. So it always takes two to tango, obviously. I just come from the individual focus. In terms of perfectionism, and what we're talking about, just then, I don't know how much of that was intentionally your focus, but what you said also was becoming comfortable with failure. And again, this ties back to our previous question, because how do we measure success, and how is success measured in organizations, and what are the expectations we have of our staff, including our female leaders, any leaders really? Is the outcome a particular organizational focus or goal, or is it in terms of staff development and leadership development? Is it more what have you done in order to, while being outside of your comfort zone, what risks have you taken? New things, new areas you've worked in, those sorts of things. And not so much, but this is maybe utopia, not so much looking at how much of it has led to success of some form, but really allowing there to be failure. That whole idea of failing fast, letting people try new things. But I feel like often organizations want to be really liberal with that, and they want to be creative and innovative, and they want their staff to be all those things. But then they are only allowed to operate within certain constraints. And don't you dare, not deliver on something, then it's like, we can't ever go there again, do anything like that again. It's frowned upon, it's framed as a failure. And so it's like, how are individuals comfortable with that when the culture around it doesn't allow for that? And I mean, at the end of the day, sorry, this is my last point, becoming comfortable with failure and becoming comfortable outside of your comfort zone. Again, that's a decision. It's like finding your own edge, and you have to constantly put yourself into that discomfort zone. You don't want to go all the way into your panic zone, but that is the only way confidence is built, is by being the exact opposite, by taking action. Action always precedes confidence. You cannot wait ever to have all your ducks lined up in a row and to have all those boxes ticked and all those sorts of things. It really just comes down much more to doing something you haven't done before, and pushing yourself out there and then gaining the experience. That's the only way we can build confidence. But of course, whether women who come to a job interview with all their boxes ticked, sorry, I'm going right back into the beginning of the chat, whether in the end they are given the chance to try themselves out outside of their comfort zone or not, obviously that is somewhat outside of their control.
Yes, that was beautifully framed. It makes so much sense also to be working with someone, a coach or a mentor, with whom you can talk to with consistency and with discipline. You're going to achieve your career progression. And wherever you are, as a woman, as a man, it's a matter of getting clarity, knowing what your milestones are, and focusing consistently and with discipline on it.
Self-leadership in a nutshell.
Absolutely. Maike, I think it was wonderful to speak with and getting your approach. So Maike, before we finish, where can people find you?
People can find me on my website, drmaikenoyhouse.com, which you might have to spell out somewhere, as well as on Instagram, LinkedIn. So we'll be very happy to connect with people. And yeah, if anyone would like some support with self-leadership on their journey, I offer coaching. I have a online program called Fresh Start Program. And for organizations, obviously, I can work with organizations on the basis of workshops, trainings, consultancy, whatever that may be.
Excellent. Thank you very much and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.